Most people picture the Rothschilds as quiet bankers and art collectors, builders of fairy tale mansions filled with chandeliers, silk walls, and manicured gardens across Europe. But in 1874, at a château in France, servants slept in unheated attics, local farmers lost ancestral land, and a grieving heir ordered construction to continue days after a funeral. These palaces were not just symbols of success. They were machines of power, grief, and control, paid for in secrecy, silence, and lives history rarely names, from quarry workers to maids paid in coins. Frankfurt, 1780s, a narrow street in the Jewish quarter. Meyer Amschel Rothschild works from a counting house barely larger than a closet. The Judengasse holds 15 families per building. Privacy does not exist. Space does not exist. But capital moves regardless of walls. Meyer built his fortune during chaos. The Napoleonic Wars tore through Europe like a financial earthquake. Monarchies needed gold to fund armies. Rothschild provided it, not from one location, from 5. He sent his sons across the continent like living branches of a single nervous system. Nathan to London, James to Paris, Salomon to Vienna, Karl to Naples. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt. Each brother opened a bank. Each bank moved money faster than any government could track. By 1815, the family had financed both sides of Waterloo. The victory made nations. It made the Rothschilds richer than most of them. But wealth without land meant nothing in 19th century Europe. Jewish families could own gold, bonds, and businesses. They could not own legitimacy. That required earth, stone, ancestry measured in acres. The Rothschilds had won the financial war. Now they needed to win the war for permanence. Nathan Rothschild bought his first country estate in 1835, not a modest home. Gunnersbury Park, 100 acres west of London, classical columns, symmetrical wings, a house that announced arrival without saying a word. He filled it with paintings, sculpture, rare books. He died there 2 years later. The estate transferred to his son Lionel, who expanded it immediately. The pattern had begun: build, inherit, expand, repeat. Lionel understood what his father had started. Mansions were not just homes. They were declarations of belonging in a world built to exclude you. In 1853, he purchased another estate. Then another. His cousins did the same. The family was no longer buying property. They were buying territory. In Paris, James de Rothschild looked at the cramped Parisian townhouses owned by old nobility and decided they were insufficient. He wanted something no French aristocrat could ignore. In 1829, he purchased the Château de Boulogne. It was not enough. He bought land in Ferrières, 30 kilometers east of Paris, flat hunting grounds owned by Joseph Fouché, Napoleon's former police chief. James paid 2.4 million francs. The land was empty. He would fill it. James hired Joseph Paxton, the English architect who had designed the Crystal Palace for the Great Exhibition. The brief was simple: build the largest private residence in France. Paxton delivered plans for a chateau modeled on an English Renaissance manor. Stables for 80 horses. A kitchen capable of preparing meals for 300 guests. Heating systems that required coal deliveries by the ton. 60 chimneys. 18 staircases. Plumbing installed before most European cities had sewage systems. Construction began in 1855. It took 7 years. The structure demanded imported stone from 4 different quarries, timber shipped from Scandinavian forests, Italian marble carried over the Alps on wagons that broke axles under the weight. James monitored every expense personally. He also monitored his siblings. This was not simply about luxury. It was about hierarchy within the family itself. Each brother competed silently with the others. Salomon built the Palais Rothschild in Vienna. Karl constructed Villa Pignatelli in Naples. Amschel renovated the Frankfurt estates. They compared, they measured, they expanded. In England, Lionel's children continued the campaign. His son Nathaniel wanted something rural, something older than money. He chose Tring Park in Hertfordshire. His brother Alfred purchased Halton House. His other brother Leopold took up Ascot House. Each estate brought architects, landscape designers, engineers, and decorators. The projects overlapped. The family moved between sites like generals surveying conquered land. By 1870, the Rothschilds owned more private land in England than several counties. In France, they controlled forests, vineyards, hunting grounds. In Austria, Salomon's descendants owned entire valleys. The family had achieved something remarkable. They had purchased legitimacy. They had built it stone by stone. But the most ambitious project was still to come. Ferdinand de Rothschild, Nathaniel's nephew, inherited a fortune in 1874 when his father died. He was 26, unmarried, grieving. He decided to build. He chose a barren hill in Buckinghamshire. Local farmers called it Waddesdon. The land grew almost nothing. The soil was thin. The elevation made it windy and cold. Ferdinand saw potential. He purchased the hill and 16 surrounding farms in a single year. The tenant families who had worked that land for generations received notices to vacate. No consultation, no negotiation. The acquisitions were legal. They were also final. Ferdinand hired a French architect, Gabriel Hippolyte Destailleur. The instructions were precise. Build a French château on English soil. Import the style, the materials, the craftsmanship. Make it impossible to distinguish from a Loire Valley palace except by geography. Destailleur began with the hill itself. It had to be reshaped. Steam-powered machinery carved terraces into the slope. Thousands of tons of earth moved to create level ground for gardens. The summit was flattened to support the mansion's weight. Roads were constructed to carry building materials up gradients that broke horses. Construction began in 1877. The project required a private railway. Stone, bricks, iron, glass, tiles, and timber arrived daily by the wagon load. Ferdinand imported everything. Bath stone from Somerset, cane stone from Normandy, roof tiles from Burgundy. The architect insisted on authenticity. If a French chateau required French materials, distance was irrelevant. Cost was irrelevant. The mansion rose slowly. Turrets, towers, mansard roofs covered in slate, ornamental chimneys that served no functional purpose. The structure was designed to impress from miles away. It succeeded. Visitors approaching Waddesdon described it as a mirage, a building that should not exist where it stood. Inside, Ferdinand commissioned interiors that rivaled Versailles. 18th century French paneling stripped from Parisian mansions and reinstalled at Waddesdon. Savonnerie carpets, Sèvres porcelain, Beauvais tapestries, furniture owned by Marie Antoinette. Every room was a museum. Every object had provenance. The estate opened in 1883, 6 years of construction, £10 million in modern value. Ferdinand hosted the Prince of Wales within the first month. Royalty validated the project. The Rothschilds had not just built mansions, they had built monuments to the idea that money could rewrite history, erase borders, and command respect from the very institutions that once excluded them. By 1885, the family operated estates across 5 nations simultaneously: Ferrières in France, Waddesdon and Halton in England, Palais Rothschild in Vienna, Schillersdorf in Silesia, Each required permanent staff, numbering in the hundreds. Each consumed resources at industrial scale. Each represented a coordinate in a transnational network of power that operated beyond the reach of any single government. The foundation was complete. The system was operational, but systems require fuel, and the fuel was human. What did it actually cost to keep these palaces running? Not the construction budgets recorded in ledgers. The other costs, the ones never written down. Waddesdon Manor required 640 full-time staff at peak operation, not counting seasonal workers, not counting contractors. 640 people employed to maintain one family's country house. The numbers describe a military operation disguised as domestic service. 80 gardeners worked the grounds year-round. 40 grooms managed the stables. 20 engineers operated the heating and electrical systems. 30 kitchen staff prepared meals. The rest cleaned, laundered, maintained, repaired, and waited. Always waiting. The staff lived on the estate. Most never left. Housing was provided in cottages and dormitories, built specifically to keep workers nearby. Proximity ensured availability. Isolation ensured control. A head gardener earned £60 per year. A junior maid earned 12. The wage gap mirrored the architecture. Visible hierarchy, unquestioned order. The workday began before dawn. Fires had to be lit in every occupied room before the family woke. Ashes had to be cleared. Floors had to be swept. Windows had to be cleaned. The mansion contained 80 rooms. Each required daily attention. Dust was not permitted. Disorder was not permitted. Evidence of labor was not permitted. Ferdinand de Rothschild documented his expectations in a private manual distributed to senior staff. Instructions covered every aspect of service: how to serve tea, how to announce guests, how to arrange flowers, how to move through hallways without being noticed. The manual was 47 pages long. It treated humans like machinery, efficient, invisible, replaceable. Guests never saw the servants' quarters. They were located in the basement and attic. Narrow hallways, small windows, no heating. In winter, maids slept under every blanket they owned. In summer, attic rooms became ovens. The contrast was deliberate. Comfort was a privilege reserved for those who did not work. The kitchen operated like a factory. Meals for weekend parties required 72 hours of preparation. Meats were delivered from London. Vegetables came from the estate's greenhouses. Desserts required specialized equipment and constant supervision. A single dinner for 30 guests might involve 12 courses. Each course demanded precise timing. Mistakes were not forgiven. Head chef Auguste Renaudin ruled the kitchen with absolute authority. He hired. He fired. He controlled access to food, equipment, and favor. Staff who displeased him found themselves reassigned to worse positions or dismissed entirely. The hierarchy was formal. The power was real. Renaudin earned £200 per year, more than 3 times the average worker. He guarded that position ruthlessly. But the kitchen was only one system. The gardens required their own empire. 80 gardeners maintained 1,200 acres of designed landscape. Parterres, fountains, topiary, rare plant collections. The grounds were divided into zones. Each zone had a foreman. Each foreman reported to the head gardener. The structure mirrored corporate management. Efficiency mattered more than individuality. Gardeners worked in all weather, frost, rain, heat. The plants required constant care, pruning, watering, fertilizing, replanting. Ferdinand imported exotic species from across the world: palms, orchids, camellias. Many did not survive English winters. They were replaced immediately. The expense was irrelevant. The appearance was everything. The head gardener kept records, daily logs detailing tasks completed, supplies used, problems encountered. These documents reveal the reality beneath the beauty. On January 14, 1889, 2 gardeners were hospitalized with frostbite after working outdoors for 11 hours in freezing conditions. They were replaced the same week. No compensation, no apology. The gardens could not wait. Maintenance consumed, resources at shocking scale. Heating Waddesdon required coal delivered by rail, 4 tons per week in winter. The boilers ran constantly. Engineers worked in shifts to keep temperatures stable. A single mechanical failure could freeze pipes throughout the building. Repairs cost hundreds of pounds. Prevention required eternal vigilance. Lighting before electrification demanded thousands of candles. Beeswax, expensive, replaced daily in chandeliers holding 50 candles each. A single evening reception consumed more candles than a working family used in a year. After electrification in 1889, the estate installed its own power plant. Coal-fed generators, generators fed lights. Lights required bulbs. Bulbs required replacement. The cycle never ended. Water came from estate wells and reservoirs. Pumps moved it uphill. Filtration systems cleaned it. Pipes distributed it. The infrastructure cost £30,000 to install. Annual maintenance added 500 more. Clean water was taken for granted by residents. It was engineering triumph for those who provided it. Ferrières operated on similar principles, but larger scale. James de Rothschild's château required 900 staff at peak. The estate was a village unto itself. Bakery, laundry, carpentry workshop, blacksmith forge. Everything needed to sustain the main house existed on site. Self-sufficiency meant control. No dependence on local suppliers. No vulnerability to strikes or shortages. The construction of Ferrières displaced more than land. Entire communities lost access to forests they had used for generations. Hunting rights were revoked. Footpaths were closed. James purchased the legal authority to exclude anyone from his property. Enforcement was strict. Gamekeepers patrolled the borders. Poachers were prosecuted. The estate was sovereign territory within France. Local resentment grew quietly. Farmers who sold land to James received market prices, but market prices assumed willing sellers. Many were not willing. They sold because refusal meant being surrounded by Rothschild property. Isolation, reduced value, eventual forced sale anyway. The acquisitions were legal. They were also coercive. The human cost extended beyond displacement. Construction workers at Ferrières faced brutal conditions, 12-hour days, dangerous machinery, minimal safety standards. In 1858, a scaffolding collapse killed 4 workers and injured 11. Construction paused for 3 days, then resumed. No investigation, no liability. The workers were paid by the day. Death ended payment. Quarries supplying stone to Rothschild projects were particularly deadly. Explosives, rock falls, crushing injuries. A quarry near Bath that provided stone for Waddesdon reported 16 deaths over 4 years. The workers had families. The families had no recourse. Industrial accidents were considered inevitable. Compensation was considered charity, not obligation. James de Rothschild died in 1868 before Ferrières was fully completed. His son Alphonse inherited the château and the imperative to finish it. Letters between Alphonse and his architects reveal the pressure. His father had envisioned perfection. Alphonse could not deliver less. Costs escalated, timelines compressed, workers were pushed harder. One letter, dated March 1870, is particularly revealing. Alphonse writes to his estate manager about delays in the ballroom ceiling. The plasterwork was behind schedule. Alphonse ordered night shifts, double wages for workers who agreed. Exhaustion led to mistakes. Mistakes led to dismissals. The ceiling was completed on time. 2 workers were injured when scaffolding collapsed during overnight work. Their names do not appear in any record beyond the manager's brief notation. The system demanded silence. Staff signed contracts forbidding them from discussing family business. Violations meant immediate dismissal without references. In an era when references determined employability, this clause ensured compliance. Servants saw everything. They said nothing. Letters between Rothschild family members occasionally reveal their awareness of the discontent. In 1881, Ferdinand wrote to his cousin Nathaniel about labor problems at Waddesdon. Local workers were demanding higher wages. Ferdinand refused. He noted that replacement workers could be hired from London if necessary. The threat worked. Wages remained unchanged. But efficiency required more than cheap labor. It required systems. The Rothschilds imported management techniques from their banking operations, hierarchies, reporting structures, performance evaluations. Staff were rated annually. Promotions were merit-based, at least in theory. In practice, favoritism and family connections mattered as much as competence. The estates also required constant supply chains: food, coal, fabric, furniture, artwork. Each category demanded specialized procurement. The Rothschilds employed purchasing agents across Europe. These agents traveled constantly, searching for the best prices on bulk goods. Competition between estates drove prices down. Suppliers who could not meet Rothschild terms lost the contracts. Market power was wielded without hesitation. Artwork acquisition revealed the same pattern. The family employed art dealers who scoured Europe for paintings, sculpture, and decorative objects. Entire collections were purchased from bankrupt aristocrats. Estate sales became opportunities. Financial distress became leverage. The Rothschilds built their museums from the wreckage of older fortunes. Ferdinand de Rothschild purchased Marie Antoinette's furniture from descendants who needed cash. The price was fair by market standards, but the market was shaped by buyers like Ferdinand, who had capital when others did not. Wealth concentrated. Objects migrated from those who inherited them to those who could afford to maintain them. The staff who maintained these collections were specialists, conservators, framers, catalogers. They worked in dedicated workshops within the estates. Their labor was skilled, precise, and endless. A single Savonnerie carpet required monthly inspection and annual cleaning. Paintings needed climate control. Porcelain needed careful handling. Objects accumulated. Care requirements multiplied. By 1900, the Rothschild estates collectively employed over 4,000 people. That number excludes temporary workers, contractors, and suppliers. 4,000 individuals whose lives revolved around maintaining environments they could never afford to inhabit. The wages paid to these workers represented a fraction of estate operating costs. At Waddesdon, annual staff salaries totaled £8,000. Total operating costs exceeded $70,000. The difference went to materials, supplies, and capital improvements. The estates consumed wealth faster than they generated it. But generation was never the point. Display was the point, and display required constant performance. The gardens had to appear effortless. The meals had to appear spontaneous. The service had to appear invisible. Perfection was the product. Labor was the engine. And the engine was designed to run until it broke. The question was never whether it would break, only when, and what would break it. The first cracks appeared from within. Deaths, unexpected, untimely, devastating. The Rothschild system was built on continuity. Inheritance passed seamlessly from one generation to the next. But biology does not respect planning. Ferdinand de Rothschild married Evelina de Rothschild in 1865. She was 18, he was 18, a cousin marriage, common within the family to preserve wealth concentration. Evelina died in childbirth 1 year later. The baby died with her. Ferdinand never remarried. Grief shaped everything he built afterward. Waddesdon was not a family home. It was a monument to absence. Every room furnished for guests who would fill the silence. Every garden designed to distract from loss. The mansion became a machine for forgetting. But machines cannot heal. Ferdinand's will, written in 1898, left Waddesdon to his sister Alice. She inherited the house, the staff, the collections, and the expectation of continuation. Alice accepted. She had no choice. Refusal would insult Ferdinand's memory. Acceptance meant dedicating her life to maintaining his vision. She moved into Waddesdon and managed it until her own death in 1922. But across Europe, other heirs faced different choices. Some estates passed to children who had no interest in country houses. Others went to distant relatives who could not afford the upkeep. The inheritance structure assumed wealth would continue growing. By 1900, maintenance costs were growing faster than fortunes. Alphonse de Rothschild died in 1905. Ferrier passed to his son Edouard. The château required 90,000 francs per year to operate. Edouard's income from the bank could cover it, barely. He began reducing staff. Gardens were simplified. Rooms were closed. The château started its slow contraction. Political instability accelerated the decline. Nationalism rose across Europe. Old empires fractured. The Rothschilds had thrived in a world of interconnected monarchies. That world was ending. Borders hardened. Suspicion of cosmopolitan wealth increased. The family name, once a symbol of success, became a target. Anti-Semitism, always present, intensified. Conspiracy theories spread. The Rothschilds were blamed for wars, economic crashes, and political upheavals they had nothing to do with. The mansions, once proof of arrival, became evidence of excessive power. What had been admired was now resented. The estates themselves became liabilities, highly visible, difficult to defend, expensive to maintain. In 1911, vandals broke into the grounds at Waddesdon and destroyed rare plantings. In Vienna, protests targeted the Palais Rothschild. The family increased security. Guards, fences, surveillance. The costs multiplied. Then came August 1914. The First World War shattered the European order the Rothschilds had navigated for a century. Nations that had been trading partners became enemies overnight. The family had branches in England, France, Austria, and Germany. Suddenly, family members were technically on opposite sides of a conflict. The Austrian Rothschilds faced immediate consequences. The Palais Rothschild in Vienna was seized by the government. Valuable collections were inventoried for potential confiscation. Salomon's descendants fled to neutral Switzerland. Decades of careful construction vanished in weeks. In France, Ferrier survived, but barely. The château was too large to staff during wartime. Edouard closed most of the building and retreated to a handful of rooms. Gardens went unmaintained. The staff was reduced to a skeleton crew of elderly workers exempt from military service. The estate that once hosted 300 guests could barely house its owner. England spared the Rothschilds direct confiscation, but public sentiment turned hostile. Lionel's descendants faced accusations of divided loyalties. The family responded by emphasizing their British identity and contributing to the war effort. Waddesdon was offered as a military hospital. The offer was declined. The suspicion remained. The war ended in 1918. Four empires collapsed. Borders were redrawn. The Rothschild banking network, built on stable relationships between established governments, had to be rebuilt from ruins. Some branches never recovered. The Naples house closed permanently. The Frankfurt house consolidated. The Vienna house struggled under the new Austrian Republic. The estates faced new threats: taxation. Post-war governments needed revenue. Inherited wealth became an obvious target. Estate taxes increased across Europe. Maintenance costs remained constant. Income declined. The mathematics became impossible. In 1922, the British government introduced higher death duties. When a Rothschild heir died, the estate owed 40% of its value in taxes. Land-rich but cash-poor families faced impossible choices: sell the estate, sell the collections, or watch the property decay while paying taxes on its theoretical value. Some heirs chose to sell. Halton House was put on the market in 1916. No buyers emerged. The house was too large, too expensive, too specialized. It remained unsold for years, deteriorating while agents searched for someone wealthy enough and willing to take on the burden. The estates that survived faced constant financial pressure. Waddesdon continued operating under Alice's management, but she reduced the staff to 200. Gardens contracted. Guest rooms closed. The house remained functional but diminished. The age of endless expansion was over. Ferrier faced a different crisis. Edouard died in 1949. The château passed to his son Guy. By then, maintenance costs exceeded 150,000 francs annually. Guy could not afford it. He donated Ferrier to the University of Paris in 1959. The château became a conference center. The family retained visiting rights. They rarely visited. Political upheaval returned in the 1930s. The rise of fascism targeted Jewish families explicitly. The Rothschilds were prominent, visible, vulnerable. In Austria, the Nazis seized Palais Rothschild in 1938, immediately after the Anschluss. The building became Gestapo headquarters. Torture chambers were installed in the basement. Beauty became horror. In France, the Rothschilds fled before the Nazi occupation. Ferrier was seized in 1940. German officers used it as a headquarters and hunting lodge. Göring personally looted artworks. What could not be moved was damaged or destroyed. The château survived physically. Its soul did not. The British estates escaped direct occupation, but not the war's economic consequences. Waddesdon contributed to civil defense efforts. The grounds were used for military training. The house sheltered child evacuees from London. The war ended in 1945. The bills came due afterward. Post-war Britain was broke. The government needed revenue. Estate taxes increased again. Death duties reached 80% in extreme cases. The Rothschilds faced the same calculation as every aristocratic family. Keep the house and lose everything else. Or give up the house and preserve the fortune. James de Rothschild, who inherited Waddesdon from Alice, chose compromise. In 1957, he bequeathed the estate to the National Trust upon his death. The house would become public property. The family would retain residence during his lifetime. After that, it belonged to the nation. The decision acknowledged reality. Private wealth could no longer sustain these palaces. Public funding could. But public funding required public access. The mansions that were built to exclude became museums that anyone could visit for the price of admission. Other families made different choices. Some estates were demolished. Destruction was cheaper than maintenance. Between 1945 and 1970, Over 1,000 British country houses were torn down. The economics were simple. An empty mansion paid property taxes. Vacant land did not. The Rothschild estates that survived did so by transforming. Ferrières became institutional property. Waddesdon became heritage. The Palais Rothschild in Vienna was eventually returned to the family in a negotiated settlement, then sold. The age of private palaces was over. What remained were fragments. But fragments carry weight. They demand care. They require explanation. And they raise questions about what we preserve and why. Waddesdon Manor opened to the public in 1959. Visitors walked through rooms that once required invitation. They saw collections assembled through wealth most could not imagine. They learned the official history, generous patron, architectural vision, cultural preservation. What they did not see were the servants' quarters. Those rooms were closed. The history of labor was not part of the tour. The narrative focused on beauty, not cost. The basement kitchens remained accessible only to staff. The attic dormitories were sealed. Preservation required selection. Selection required choices about which stories mattered. The National Trust inherited more than a building. It inherited an obligation to maintain standards set by unlimited private wealth using limited public funds. The garden still required full-time gardeners. The collection still needed conservation. The structure still demanded constant repair. But the funding model had changed completely. Admission fees covered part of the costs. Government grants covered more. Private donations filled gaps. The house that once consumed one family's fortune now required contributions from thousands of visitors annually. The burden had been redistributed, but it had not disappeared. Modern Waddesdon employs 120 people year-round, far fewer than the 600 at peak, but still a significant workforce sustained by an estate that generates no productive output. The house is a museum. Museums are economic black holes. They consume resources to preserve the past. The value is cultural, not financial. The National Trust spent £4 million on roof repairs between 2005 and 2010. Original materials, period techniques, authenticity required expense. The roof protects collections worth hundreds of millions. The logic was clear, but the dependency was total. Without constant intervention, the house would decay within decades. Ferrières followed a different path. The University of Paris managed the château from 1959 until 1975. Academic conferences, administrative offices. The building was used, not displayed. Then the family repurchased it, not to live in, to control the narrative. The château was restored in the 1990s using Rothschild family funds. Modern amenities were installed: climate control, security systems, updated plumbing. The work cost millions. The result was a private event space available for corporate rentals and weddings. History became commerce. The ballrooms built for aristocratic gatherings now host product launches. The transformation reveals a truth about these estates. They survive only by adapting. Pure preservation is economically impossible. The houses must earn their keep through tourism, events, or institutional use. The alternative is decay. Some Rothschild properties chose decay. Halton House, never successfully sold, was demolished in 1918. The materials were salvaged. The site was cleared. A Royal Air Force base now occupies the grounds. The palace vanished. The land endured. In Vienna, the Palais Rothschild met a stranger fate. Returned to the family after decades of legal battles, it was sold to a developer in 1954. The buyer demolished it in 1956. An office building replaced it. The only remnant is a small park. No plaque marks what stood there. The erasure is complete. Other estates exist in limbo. Schillersdorf in Silesia became Polish territory after World War II. The mansion was nationalized, converted into apartments, then abandoned in the 1970s. It stands empty now, windows broken, roofs collapsing, nature reclaiming cultivated gardens. The cost of restoration exceeds any conceivable return, so it dies slowly. These afterlives matter. They reveal what happens when the money stops flowing. The mansions were designed to be eternal, but eternity requires constant funding. When funding ends, so does the illusion. The Rothschild banking empire survived the 20th century. The family remains wealthy, but the mansion system they built is gone. The houses that remain are artifacts, not homes. They belong to trusts, governments, or developers. The family visits as guests. What does this legacy mean? The estates proved that wealth could build monuments. They also proved that monuments are burdens. Future generations inherit the obligation to maintain, restore, and explain them. The beauty remains. So does the cost. Waddesdon receives 200,000 visitors annually. Each pays admission. Each generates revenue. But annual operating costs exceed £5 million. The deficit is covered by the Rothschild Foundation. The family still pays, a century after surrendering ownership. The system changed. The dependency did not. The labor that built these estates is largely forgotten. The archives at Waddesdon contain account books listing expenditures. Stone, timber, iron. Wages appear as line items. Names do not. The thousands of workers who shaped the grounds, raised the walls, and maintained the illusion left almost no individual trace. Occasionally, a record surfaces. A diary kept by a head gardener. A letter written by a dismissed servant. These fragments hint at lives spent in service to a vision they did not share. The gardener describes his pride in the parterres. The servant describes her exhaustion. Both convey dedication. Neither questions the system. Modern historians have begun examining these estates differently, not as isolated achievements, but as nodes in a network of extraction. Capital flowed from banking operations across Europe into construction projects that reorganized local economies. Land was consolidated. Labor was imported. Resources were redirected. The mansions were concentrations of wealth made visible. This perspective challenges the traditional narrative. Instead of celebrating architectural ambition, it asks who paid. Instead of admiring collections, it asks how they were acquired. Instead of praising preservation, it asks what is being preserved and for whom. The answers are uncomfortable. The estates were built on legal but coercive land acquisitions. They were constructed by workers who had few alternatives. They were maintained by servants who had no voice. The beauty is real. So is the exploitation. But exploitation is a strong word. It implies intention. The Rothschilds operated within the norms of their era. Wealthy families built estates. Those estates required staff. Staff accepted positions because employment was better than poverty. The system was legal, widespread, and accepted. Judging it by modern standards risks anachronism. Yet the standards of the time were not uniform. Contemporary critics noted the excesses. Socialists protested the concentration of wealth. Labor organizers fought for better conditions. The Rothschilds were aware of these critiques. They chose to continue anyway. Their choice reflected a belief that wealth entitled them to live as they wished. That belief was shared by aristocrats across Europe. The Rothschilds were not unique. They were simply more successful at translating wealth into grandeur. The legacy is not simply architectural, it is philosophical. These estates embody a question. Does private wealth have social obligations beyond legal requirements? The Rothschilds believed it did not. They built for themselves. They employed thousands. They preserved art. They donated some estates to public use. But they did so on their terms. Modern inheritors of these estates face the same question differently. Public funding means public accountability. The National Trust must justify expenditures. Universities must balance preservation with educational mission. The houses remain beautiful, but they are no longer private expressions of unchecked ambition. The transformation reveals limits. Private wealth built monuments. Public resources maintain them. The scale required to preserve these estates exceeds what any individual can sustain indefinitely. The age of dynastic fortunes maintaining private palaces is over. What remains is collective responsibility for inherited grandeur. Some argue these houses should be allowed to decay. They represent a world of inequality that should not be celebrated. Maintaining them diverts resources from contemporary needs. Let them crumble. Build something new. Others argue preservation serves education. These estates teach about power, ambition, and the costs of both. They are documents of an era. Losing them would erase evidence. Better to maintain them critically, acknowledging both beauty and exploitation. The debate continues. The houses endure, for now. Waddesdon Manor will require millions more in maintenance over the coming decades. The National Trust has committed to providing it. Visitors will continue coming. The gardens will be tended. The collections will be preserved. The servants' quarters will remain closed. Ferrières will host more weddings and corporate events. The château will generate revenue. The family will profit indirectly. The history will be curated carefully. Uncomfortable details will be minimized. Celebration will dominate. The demolished estates are gone. The land serves new purposes: military bases, office buildings, housing developments. The palaces are forgotten except in photographs. History moves forward. But the photographs remain. They show something impossible to recreate. Wealth concentrated so absolutely that it could reshape landscapes, import entire artistic traditions, and employ populations larger than most villages. The images are beautiful. They are also evidence. Evidence of what humans build when resources are unlimited. Evidence of what humans sacrifice when they serve those visions. Evidence that grandeur requires fuel, and that fuel is always human time, human labor, and human lives measured in wages, injuries, and silent endurance. The Rothschild mansions stand as monuments, not just to a family, to a system, a way of organizing society where capital moves freely, labor is cheap, and beauty is the responsibility of those who can afford it. The system produced wonders. It also produced costs that compounded across generations. We inherit both, the beauty and the bill, and we decide every year whether to keep paying. The estates we have explored today are more than historical curiosities. They are questions posed in stone, questions about wealth, power, and what we choose to preserve. If you found this examination compelling, let me know in the comments which estate we should investigate next. Subscribe if you want more stories that look beyond the beauty to the systems underneath. And if you believe this history matters, share it. These houses still stand. The conversations about them are just beginning.